Okay, yeah, we've got a single celebrant, right? One priest rather than a whole group of people moving in unison, right?
It's very discordant.
Yeah, well, what about it is discordant?
The music.
Yeah, the music is certainly a lot less practiced, rehearsed, and formal, right? You've got the one guy just kind of banging on these gongs and bells, and then these two guys playing the clarinets. They're playing the same notes, but not really quite at the same time. So yeah, it sounds a little discordant. What about the way the people participating are dressed?
It's considerably more informal than anything in Confucianism.
Yeah, you can even see the priest, right? Underneath his robes, he's got on a pair of slacks and a pair of black sneakers, right? No one else is dressed formally here. Everybody else is just wearing like a button-down and slacks, street clothes. Anything else you notice here that is in particular different from the Confucian ritual?
Inside.
Yeah, it's well, the other one was inside as well.
Oh, right.
Their faces didn't seem to have like a universal expression.
Yeah.
It wasn't like as important as it was in the Confucian video, and they kind of didn't take importance on motion either. They kind of just did what they wanted until their heart.
Yeah, I mean, the priest is going through a set of rehearsed ritual motions, right? But he's doing it quickly, like he's been doing it for his entire adult life, which he probably has because it's his job, right? And he's not like giving every small movements some sort of like practiced ritual significance, right? A lot of it just kind of seems like muscle memory. Yeah, Alexa, did you have a hand up?
Did he bow to someone?
He is bowing to that altar, right? Yeah, so remembering, this is also an ancestor worship ceremony, like the other one. That's one thing they have in common. But yeah, this one is about putting restless ghosts back to sleep, right? Yes?
I think what she might have been talking about, which I noticed, is like there was someone off screen and handed him something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it was kind of like he bowed to him. And
Oh, okay, yeah, right. There's the guy who hands him that that offering or whatever to put on the altar, right? Yeah. And yeah, it's just conventional show of respect, basically.
I just wasn't sure what he was handing him.
I'm not sure what he's handing him. I don't actually know what that object is. I'll admit to that. Yeah, Matthew.
The locations for the two videos also seem different. Like for the Confucian one, that was more like in the Grand Temple with a lot of people.
Right.
And for this video, for the video you just showed us, while it does have some temple features, it also is like a very common place. It seemed like it was more like in an art classroom or like a workshop more than anything.
Yeah, I mean, there are people just walking through, right? Who have nothing to do with the ritual. Like there's that woman in the t-shirt who just walks by, looks at them, and then goes by, right? Yeah, it looks like it's set up almost in a public place. And there are Taoist temples, but a lot of Taoist rituals take place in public space. Much more so than you would probably find with Confucian ritual. A lot of street festivals and things like that. So what does that suggest to us about an important difference between Confucian belief and practice and Taoist belief and practice? What can we draw from that? Yeah, Megan.
It kind of seems like with the Confucianism, they're like trying to attain something. Like they're wanting everything to be so orderly. It's unbelievable. And I can kind of see more with the Taoists how they're going the way or whatever. Like they're trying to be natural.
Yeah, this is about 1,000 times more casual, right? Yeah, what were you going to say, Will?
I was going to say that it was a whole lot more relaxed, and they were here now, so that's when they were going to perform the ceremony. It wasn't moving off, so it was much more about acceptance of your place.
Yeah, it's not so much about cultivating yourself and making yourself a place, but about accepting the place where you are and becoming one with that place. Taoism has much stronger roots in Chinese folk religion than Confucianism does. Particularly a tradition of, oh, this is the shitty marker. Where's the good one? A tradition of sort of legendary sage hermits who go off into the forest or to the mountains or, some sort of isolated, unforgiving landscape by themselves to cultivate their inner power. Now, as our presentation group told us, there is a figure to whom the teachings in the Daodejing are attached, right? This guy Laozi, but we're not entirely sure that Laozi really existed. And we're certainly not sure that he actually wrote any portion of the Daodejing, particularly since the earliest text we have comes from the 3rd century BCE. So what is more likely is that these poems were written or collected much later and then attached to the name of this particular figure, much like the Analects were collected and written much later than Confucius actually lived, and then attached to his particular name. So, the text itself is a product of, if we think back to our little timeline of Chinese history last time, the Warring States period, which most historians date from about 475 to 221 BCE. In 221 BCE, the Qin Empire, right, the first ever unified Chinese empire, which actually gives the country its modern name, comes to power. But for 250 years before that, China is a collection of independent states, basically, that are in constant contention with each other, constant striving with each other. Now, Confucianism, we already noted, was a product of the period just before that. Right, when the social fabric is framed, but society isn't actually broken yet. So Confucius invents a tradition to try to hold what's left of the Zhao Empire together. Right, based on reciprocity in your personal relationships and respect for traditional hierarchies. Now, the Warring States period produces other philosophical viewpoints as well, to which Taoism is probably a reaction. One of the most prominent schools of thought in the Warring States period was called Legalism. It was promoted by a guy by the name of Shang Yang, among others. And legalism was essentially a kind of philosophical authoritarianism. What the legalists wanted to do was essentially stamp out the idea of private morality, right? That a person could have personal definitions of good and evil. They felt that this led to too much contention in the state. So instead of letting people have their own personal moral compass, come to their own personal conclusions about what is good and what is evil, the legalists argued that the state should define what is good and what is evil, and that should be that, right? Ideas that do not accord with state morality, with official morality, need to be stamped out. This is how we build, according to a legalist, a stable nation. We have to get everybody on the same page by force, if necessary. Taoism comes at this from a completely different direction. Right? Two basic principles to understand about Taoism. The first is that a Taoist believes that everything is relative. That is, that nothing has meaning outside of context, right? You can't define something in and of itself without looking at the immediately related objects, right? Yeah, I'm sorry, what were you going to say?
I was just gonna ask, is this like related to the concept of yin and yang? Is that where this came out of?
Yeah, yin and yang are actually key Taoist ideas. I mean, they're key Chinese philosophical ideas anyway. So we'll just pause there and actually sort of briefly explain this. Most of you, I think, have probably seen this symbol, right? It's a circle that's divided in half. The top half is black with a white dot in it, and the bottom half is white with a black dot in it. We're all familiar with this, yes? Okay. So the black half of the circle represents the principle that's called yin. And yin is associated with femininity, darkness, wetness, and passivity. The white side of the circle, yang, is associated with masculinity, light, dryness, and action. Now, it's typical in Chinese philosophical systems to lean on the active side of the dichotomy, the yang, right? To regard the active side as more important, right? You're supposed to do. You are supposed to act upon people and objects outside of yourself. Taoism placed its emphasis instead on the yin. That if you want to achieve true power, what you need to do, in fact, is yield, is be passive, is bend. You accumulate more power by simply existing in harmony with your environment than you do by trying to impose your will upon it. Now, you'll notice as well that each side of the circle contains some of its opposite within it, right? And this refers to the Taoist idea that you can really only define a thing in terms of its opposite, right? In terms of what it is not. Right? You can't speak of the way, you can't come up with a definition of the way, you can only explain what the way isn't. You can't explain good without explaining evil. You can't explain male without explaining female, right? If you don't understand the opposite concept, you don't understand the concept. Now, if the way can only be understood in terms of what it is not, what is the way not, right? Does the way actually have an opposite concept? That which is not the way, yes. Yeah, so this is the, what we're going to try to get at, right, by the end of the class, right, is, okay, what is not the way, and how does this tell us what the way might be? Now, the problem is, that the text does not actually give us any clear clues as to what the way is. And we're specifically told that if we consciously try to follow the way, we've already fucked it up. Right? You cannot make a conscious decision, according to Laozi, to become a Taoist. You can't just decide to follow the way, because doing so is an action. And you follow the way by cultivating inaction. Right? I think you guys mentioned, right, the idea of Wu Wei. Right? Wei means action. Wu, not or none. So Wu Wei, non-action. Now this doesn't literally mean that you just sit around doing nothing. What it does mean is that you cultivate a kind of stillness of mind, a kind of inner peace, by ridding yourself of desires. And what Laozi means by desires is also relatively specific. Right? We can get a good sense of this. Let's see, when he talks on page 1348, poem 12. The 5 colors make man's eyes blind. The 5 notes make his ears deaf. The 5 tastes injure his palate. Riding and hunting make his mind go wild with excitement. Goods hard to come by serve to hinder his progress. Hence the sage is for the belly, not for the eye. Therefore he discards the one and takes the other. So the things that he's rejecting here, right? Music, fancy food, riding and hunting, aesthetic pleasure. What he's rejecting here are essentially civilized pursuits. Right? The sorts of pursuits that cultivated, educated people in his time would have enjoyed. The sorts of pursuits that cultivated, educated people in our own time often enjoy. So by ridding yourself of desires, what he's talking about are wants and needs that are created by civilization and by cultivation. Right? He's not saying don't want anything. What he is saying is don't want these specific kinds of things. Right? If you reject civilized values, civilized pursuits, then you come closer to the natural order of things. You come closer to living in harmony with your actual environment. Now, how does this present a different interpretation of life and what it means than we get from Confucius? What's most important to Confucius? Yeah, knowing your place, right? Knowing your place in relation to what primarily?
Relationships with other people.
Yeah, Confucius is mostly concerned with your place in the human world, right? In the social worlds. Your human relationships are what matter. In Taoism, spell it with a T or with a D, it doesn't really make a difference. You see it spelled both ways. In Taoism, what matters primarily is your relationship to the natural world. If you are concerned with your position relative to other people, this is going to cause you to strive for distinction in the human world, right? Which is what Confucianism encourages, right? You study, you cultivate your particular virtues, right? Through, you cultivate your humanity essentially through ritual. And you work yourself up into a junzi, a gentleman, right? A Taoist would say that this is a sure way to put people into conflict with each other. And so, if you just don't give a shit about social distinctions, if you just stop caring about where you are in relation to other people, then there is no more contention. If you don't care about fancy goods, and you don't care about being elevated above other people, you have no reason to fight with anyone. You have no reason to contend with your neighbor. And that is a direct response in a lot of ways to historical circumstances. Right, remember when this is written. Remember what our historical context is here, right? The social fabric has already fallen apart. The Taoist in this period doesn't see any way of putting it back together and is really more concerned with riding out the storm. Just getting through this. And if you put yourself into contention with others, right, the whole world's in a state of contention. So if you accumulate day, which you also see spelled with either a D or a T, if you accumulate day by living in harmony with your environment, then you can actually influence the shape of your environment without acting upon it. Right? Your moral force that you have gathered unto yourself radiates outward and influences other people, animals, trees, rocks, whatever. So can somebody remind me what the Confucian idea of day was? Yeah, Alexa.
Excellence and virtue.
Yeah, excellence and virtue, right? And how did you get it?
By combining the three things.
Yeah, Ren, Li, and Yi, right? Humanity, ritual, and righteousness together. And as you work your way to becoming the junzi, you radiate day outward, right? And your powerful moral influence influences others around you. So you accumulate day in Confucianism, again, through social behavior, through proper social behavior mostly, and through concern for others. Yeah?
Am I understanding this correctly, that in Confucianism, the day that you accumulate affects other people,
Mm-hmm.
whereas in Taoism, the day that you accumulate only affects your environment?
Oh, in Taoism it affects other people as well. But you accumulate it rather differently. The concept is a bit different, yeah. So it might actually help if we look at, again on page 1348, very, very useful page, poem 11. Can I get a volunteer to read poem 11 for us? Yeah, go ahead.
The 5 colors make man's
No,
eye.
the one above it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yep.
30 spokes, share 1 cup, adopt the nothing therein to the purpose in hand, and you will have the use of the card. Knead clay in order to make a vessel, adopt the nothing therein to the purpose in hand, and you will have the use of the vessel. Cut out doors and windows in order to make a room, adopt the nothing therein to the purpose in your hand, and you will have the use of the room. Thus, what we gain is something, yet it is by virtue of nothing that this can be put to use.
Okay, so this is a sort of, this is dealing with the idea of emptiness as a kind of ideal, right? Emptiness is something you should cultivate, right? Emptiness of knowledge, emptiness of desire, because that emptiness then creates potential. Right, through cultivating stillness of mind, you build up this sort of inner reservoir of emptiness that you can then fill up with day, right? You can then fill up with spiritual power. This is one of the reasons, by the way, that Taoism favors imagery of the feminine and the idea of the feminine over the idea of the masculine. Right? The womb is a kind of ultimate symbol of potential. Right? The potential growth of more human life. We see similar ideas if we look towards the end here. Where the hell is it?
I think it's on 1351 at the bottom, if that's the right one.
Number 28.
Yeah, is that it?
No, but it'll work. Can you read that for us then, Kayla, please?
Know the male, but keep to the role of the female, and be refined to the empire. If you are a refined to the empire, then the constant virtue will not desert you, and you will again return to being a babe. Know the white, but keep to the role of the black, and be the model to the empire. If you are a model to the empire, then the constant virtue will not be wanting, and you will not return to the infant no honor. But keep to the role of the disgrace, and be a value to the empire. If you are a value to the empire, then the constant virtue will be sufficient, and you will return to being the uncovered block. When the uncovered block shatters, it becomes vessels. The sage makes use of these and becomes the lord over the officials. Hence the greatest cutting does not subvert.
Okay, great, thank you. So the key images here, right? The feminine, right, keeps the role of the female, ravine, valley, vessels, right? All regarded here as sort of voids that can then contain something else, right? That can become receptacles for power, right? When the uncarved block, the block that has not been acted upon, the block that has not been cultivated, is smashed, it becomes all of these smaller receptacles for day, all of these smaller receptacles for power. So, cultivating your own emptiness, stepping back and filling yourself with day, that's the basic goal. That's how you survive in a harsh world. That's how you avoid contention with your neighbors while still gaining power for yourself. Now, do you guys have questions about specific passages here? Because I know that, this is, it's pretty damn cryptic. And I know some of you have expressed frustration with it. So are there particular passages that you would like to ask about, that you would like to talk about?
Well, my only question is, if you look at number 3.
Okay.
Do that which consists of taking no action, and order will prevail. Then it's literally not possible to take no action.
I have an answer to this.
Okay, go ahead.
And I'm going to use the same example that I used last year while taking Merlin. When I think of this, I think of the SpongeBob episode with the conch shell. When they do nothing, they ultimately get what they want. I know it's kind of a stupid example, but you see the same ideas.
Yeah, I do. But see, I would argue that's an action. Doing nothing in and of itself is an action.
If you're conscious of doing
So like,
I think the idea of action here, right, is connected to the idea of acting with desire, right? Acting with some sort of end in mind, right? I want this, so I will do this. If you sit back and do nothing, as in Kayla's example here, what you want will come to you naturally anyway, because you are living in harmony with your environment rather than trying to force your will upon it.
so like if you really want, it's kind of like the concept if you really want something, let it go kind of thing.
Yeah, kind of, yeah. I mean, although, again, according to the Tao, you really shouldn't want things. Part of the idea is to rid yourself of desire so that you don't care about the outcome of actions. If we look at the rest of this poem, right? Not to honor men of worth will keep the people from contention. Not to value goods which are hard to come by will keep them from theft. Not to display what is desirable will keep them from being unsettled of mind. Therefore, in governing the people, the sage empties their minds but fills their bellies, weakens their wills but strengthens their bones. He always keeps them innocent of knowledge and free from desire, and ensures that the clever never dare to act. Do that which consists in taking no action, and order will prevail. So, not to honor men of worth. What essentially is he telling you not to do?
I mean, it seems like he's saying like, don't honor rich people almost.
Don't envy
No, I mean, don't honor legendary figures.
Yeah.
Don't honor your ancestors. Don't honor anyone.
Yeah, essentially, yeah. Don't put anybody on a higher level than anyone else. Keep everyone at the same plane, at the same level, and then people have no reason to contend for honors, right? Not to value goods which are hard to come by will keep them from theft, right? If you show that you don't value rare and expensive objects, other people will follow your example. They won't value them either. I mean, like,
No, they'll take them because they will value them.
what's that?
They'll take them and they'll value them.
Well, but, you know, like, if we look at, you know, the sorts of things that we tend to spend a lot of money, like, I mean, for example, like, why the hell do we value gold?
Because
Because it's shiny.
Because
Yeah.
it's shiny, and because a bunch of people way back in the past decided gold was worth something,
Yeah.
and we all just agreed.
But it's kind of stupid, just like diamonds, for instance. We have enough diamonds on the earth right now to flood it and make it less valuable
Sure.
than glass.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, it just
Yeah.
kind of seems.
But we assign these artificial values to
Right.
things.
Paper money.
The concept
Yeah.
of monetary worth is a human correction.
Exactly, yeah. And if we don't worry about such things, if we don't worry about what things are worth, if we don't value things that we don't need, then the people will refrain from covetous behavior, right? They won't steal, they won't fight over objects. Not to display what is desirable will keep them from being unsettled of mind, right? So essentially, this is, you know, a statement against conspicuous consumption, right? Right? Don't live like Kanye West or the Kardashians. Right? Don't live in a way that would make certain people envy you.
Like Paris.
Trump.
Like.
Or-
They went to Paris.
I wasn't going to go there, but you did. Yeah, I mean, it's against ostentation, right? So if you show that you value meaningless, shiny bullshit, other people will value meaningless, shiny bullshit. And if you show that you don't value it, then they'll ignore it too. And so, if nobody is set above anybody else, if nobody is cooing over shiny objects, right, order will prevail because nobody will want meaningless bullshit.
See, that's strict Taoism. When you're really following the way, you don't want anything. So when you don't get anything, you're perfectly happy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and that's the. It's not about following the way in order to get things from the way.
When you intentionally follow the way.
I know, which again you can't do. You can't intentionally follow it.
You can't intentionally out one thing.
Yeah, you could.
It's a lot like communism.
It is actually. Yeah, there are.
Communism worked out in China.
Yeah, there are.
Found it.
Word.
Worked is a relative term.
Well, one could argue that what is actually developed in China is a kind of authoritarian capitalism.
Right,
But-
because they're more capitalist than us. In a lot of, well, not always, but in a lot of ways, they value real capitalism, you don't necessarily.
Well, but let's try to stay as close to the way as we can without consciously following it. Right? So yeah, Kayla, go ahead.
Okay, in the passage 5,
Mm-hmm.
it seems like they give kind of some sort of respect to purgatory. And it would kind
Okay.
of make sense why they would do that, because it's kind of like the in-between stage where you're not really in heaven or in hell or on earth. So
Mhm.
is that why it's kind of, or did I just completely take that the wrong way?
I think, well, and one thing, again, to remember about most Chinese religions, most East Asian religions, period, is that they don't require the idea of a god or an afterlife. Probably the closest thing to an afterlife tradition we have in Chinese and Japanese religions is really in Buddhism, and Buddhism is more about, freeing yourself from the cycle of reincarnation. Taoism and Confucianism don't have any specific afterlife concept. What we have here, right? Heaven and earth are ruthless and treat the myriad creatures as straw dogs. The sage is ruthless and treats the people as straw dogs. To understand this, we need to go back actually to poem 1. The way that can be spoken of is not the constant way. The name that can be named is not the constant name. The nameless was the beginning of heaven and earth. The named was the mother of the myriad creatures. So what this is actually closer to is Platonic philosophy, right? The myriad creatures represent the world that you can see, right? The world that you can directly interact with. The nameless, the force that generates everything, refers to a kind of world of ideas that you don't have direct access to. So when heaven and earth treat the myriad creatures as straw dogs, the sage, in imitation, treats the people as straw dogs. What's being suggested is that because heaven and earth are indifferent to essentially, physical objects, right? They don't show care for physical objects. The sage should be indifferent in his relations with other people. And then the bit about the bellows, right? Is not the space between heaven and earth like a bellows. It is empty without being exhausted. The more it works, the more comes out. This is that idea of potential again, right? The bellows only works because the inside of it is empty, right? It draws in air, pushes air back out. Draws air in, pushes air back out. Right? You don't have the use of the bellows if you put something in them. And each time you empty the air out again, you have the potential to draw more back in. Does that make a little more sense now? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, other questions you guys have, observations you have. You're doing great. You guys are actually doing really well with a really difficult and paradoxical and confusing, and I know in many ways frequently annoying text.
Why do so many religions feel the need to protect the people from intelligence?
Well, I don't know that that's a question I can answer.
I think that's like one of those truly philosophical questions that no one has ever answered.
Yeah, I can tell you what the Taoist response to people with intelligence is. Right now, the Confucian response is that people with intelligence also need to have humanity so that they don't simply use their intelligence to gain unfair advantage over others. The Taoist idea would probably suggest more that people of intelligence, bless you, will always try to use their intelligence to gain advantage over others. And if you really want to stop people from contending, from fighting amongst themselves, which is really what Taoism wants, right? It's a different response to this. We sort of got away from the whole legalism thing, right? But it's a different response to the same problem, right? Legalists want to end war and end fighting by making everyone believe the same thing. Taoists want to end war and stop fighting by making people not care about society or about social distinctions. Essentially, by getting people to abandon their idea of civilization for a more natural way of life. And intelligent people like to make things, right? Intelligent people like to build dams, they like to build walls, they like to build palaces, they like to make art, they like to do things with their intelligence. So I think the injunctions against cleverness and against intelligence in the Daodejing, right? It's like, if you don't keep these kinds of people in check, this leads to corruption and then to contention.
There's a lot of similarities between Taoism and Buddhism. And I remember that the founder of the Buddhist religion, supposedly, was a priest of another religion, and he sat under a tree and had an epiphany. Was he a Taoist, or was it?
No, Buddhism originates in India, so he would have been probably a follower of not Hinduism, but that kind of pre-Hindu Vedic religion.
I just couldn't remember which one it was.
What's
Yes.
number 2?
Number 2? Oh yeah. Right, somebody asked a question and I got distracted and never got back to that. Okay, so, right, major Taoist principles. Right, this is, again, forgetful and poorly organized. So, first major principle, right, is the idea that everything is relative.
Well, that's what you're following the way. It's unorganized.
What's that?
I said that's good. You're following the way. It's unorganized.
Yeah, exactly.
You recognize it.
I know, if only. Okay, principle 2 is acceptance of natural processes. Right? Death and decay are inevitable. Don't strive against them. Erosion is inevitable. Don't strive against it, right? Striving against natural forces leads only to unhappiness and contention. So I don't think it's included in this selection, but there is one poem in which Laozi describes a river flowing over a stone. And the river wears away the stone over a very, very, very long time. But because the stone, does nothing to push back against the river, it just accepts the motion of the river, right? It does not disappear before its time, and it does not. It doesn't just doesn't disrupt the natural order anyway, right? So yeah, acceptance of natural processes is principle 2. Right. These are the 2 major things to get about what a Taoist believes and how it's different from what a legalist believes. Now we see specific attacks here as well on the Confucians and on the legalists. If we look on page 1352, can I get a volunteer to read poem 38?
A man of the highest virtue does not keep the virtue, and that is why he has virtue. A man of the lowest virtue never strays from virtue, and that is why he is without virtue. The former never acts, and yet leaves nothing undone. The latter acts, but there are things left undone. A man of the highest benevolence acts, but from no ulterior motive. A man of the highest rectitude acts, but from ulterior motive. A man most conversant in the rights acts, but when no one responds, rolls up his sleeves and resorts to persuasion by force. Hence, when the way was lost, there was virtue. When virtue was lost, there was benevolence. When benevolence was lost, there was rectitude. When rectitude was lost, there were the rights. The rights are the wearing thin of loyalty and good faith, and the beginning of disorder. Foreknowledge is the flowery embellishment of the way, and the beginning of folly. Hence the man of large mind abides in the thick and not in the thin, in the fruit and not in the flower. Therefore he discards the one and takes the other.
Okay, so the major takeaway here, right, comes in that second little verse paragraph, right? When the way was lost, there was virtue. When virtue was lost, there was benevolence. When benevolence was lost, there was rectitude. When rectitude was lost, there were the rights. Now, if we think about the Confucian emphasis on ritual and on proper performance of ritual, right, what we see here is the description of a kind of chain of degeneracy. Right? Each thing in the chain is a poor substitute for the thing that came before it, right? A sort of pale imitation. Again, really kind of like Plato.
Did each of those represent a different competing philosophy?
Not necessarily. The big targets for the Taoists, I mean, like, there were lots of philosophical schools in China. But mostly, like, they were these traveling sages who would go around to various courts and try to get patrons. Usually by telling the rulers of various states, hey, I'll help you win the whole empire. It's called the period of 100 schools. There aren't actually quite 100, but there are lots of them. But the major targets of the Daodejing are the legalists and the Confucians. And one thing that those groups have in common is their emphasis on the rights, right? If people have rectitude, right, if they actually behave correctly on their own, they don't need the rights. If people are actually nice to each other, generous with each other, without actually being told they have to be, they don't need rectitude, right? They don't need rules for behavior. If people are actually genuinely good and genuinely act disinterestedly to help others, they don't need virtue. Or they are the way is the thing that all these other things that we regard as good are they're pale imitations of it, right? The way is sort of the Platonic original. The thing that's up there in that realm of ideas that we can't quite access ourselves. And everything else is a pale imitation of it in the visible world. The rights being the palest imitation of the way because it's the furthest away from the original. So if you actually have the way, and you don't have the way as a person, right? The world follows the way or doesn't. It's been argued by a number of scholars that the Daodejing is not actually intended as a manual for individual human beings to follow. It's more a sort of description of an ideal state of the world. But if the world is actually following the way, these other things are completely unnecessary. If you just do all of these things, if you just do good without thinking about it, without expecting anything to come of it, you have no need for rules or laws. The perfectly ordered kingdom is simply one in which the people do not contend with each other. All right. Other questions? We have a couple minutes. Anybody still completely baffled by this? We're feeling better? Maybe a little? No?
If I say no, does that mean I get it?
No. All right, so we're going to be moving on next time back to the other side of back to the Mediterranean. You're going to be looking at some excerpts from one of the first, one of the first examples of autobiography. We're going to be looking at Augustine's Confessions and talking about just how bloody weird the early Christian world was. So, call up any discussion questions. You do what you like with those. I have something to get back to you quickly, and then you are free to go. All right. These Matthew. Harley. Alexa.
I'm going to provide it right after class.